Hello, welcome to my channel WWE Pulse.
In this series, we're going to look at different types of heels or villains that are commonly found in professional wrestling. And today, we're looking at what I like to call the monster heel. Now, this is a term that I came up with because there is really no other way to describe this particular type of heel. So we're going to start off by talking about what makes a monster heel, how they became a thing, and then talk about some of my favorite examples before finishing off with who I think is the greatest monster heel of all time. So, first things first, what actually defines a monster heel? Well, the easiest way to put it is that this is a character whose primary defining feature is that they are an unstoppable force of nature. That means they are almost always physically imposing. Usually very large individuals that dominate their opponents simply through sheer power. The idea being that when this wrestler steps foot into the ring, they should be a physically superior specimen whose presence alone strikes fear into the hearts of their opponents. You know, someone so big and strong that they just naturally overpower whoever happens to get in their way. A lot of times these wrestlers are also characterized by having little to no technical skill set, instead relying purely on their size and strength, dominating their opponents by hitting a few signature moves over and over again. And the reason why this works so well is because it creates a sense of hopelessness in your average wrestling protagonist. Because the story that wrestling is telling us is that even if our hero tries their best, even if they bring their game, it still won't be enough, because this obstacle is just too great for them to overcome. Therefore, our heroes have to either find a way to outsmart the monster or somehow get an advantage by exploiting their weakness in order to defeat them. And speaking of those weaknesses, that's another common thread among these characters. Because while it may seem like they are unbeatable, they do have a fatal flaw that can lead to their downfall. Usually, it has something to do with their personal lives, which may lead to them losing focus or becoming distracted, which in turn allows them to become vulnerable. This could be due to outside forces, such as the interference of their manager, or more commonly, it will come from the actions of their opponent, and when exploited correctly, this vulnerability can lead to the monster's demise. But despite all that, the main reason why these characters work so well is because they make for a great foil for the hero, since their entire existence is predicated on being an unmovable object. It gives the hero the perfect opportunity to shine. When done right, this should make the hero look resourceful, clever, and most importantly, likable. Because the story wrestling is telling us is that even though this hero might be smaller and weaker than their opponent, they refuse to give up. And through their perseverance, they are able to succeed where others have failed. That's why these types of villains have been around since the very beginning. One of the earliest examples that I can think of would be the character of Bruno the Bull, a gigantic masked wrestler who was managed by the nefarious Sir Robert Walford. Then of course, you had the likes of WWF champion Ivan Koloff, who terrorized the territory throughout the 1970s. Standing at 6'8" and weighing nearly 300 pounds, he was a giant of a man who easily fit the bill. It wasn't until later, though, that we started seeing more of these characters emerge. Guys like King Kong Bundy, who was advertised as a 480-pound behemoth out of Louisiana. And while his actual weight was far less than that, he was still a massive individual whose size alone intimidated his opponents. Or how about Big John Studd, another 7-footer who was known for his incredible strength and his ability to pick up people and slam them to the ground. but probably no monster. Heel dominated the wrestling world quite like the one and only, hailing from the island of Oahu in Hawaii. Yokozuna's claim to fame was that he was a bona fide 500-pound sumo wrestler who brought his skills to the squared circle. In reality, he weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 450 pounds. But regardless, fans ate it up, and there were few sights more terrifying than watching him charge across the ring towards his unsuspecting prey. And while Yokozuna's career was tragically cut short due to health issues, the WWE would eventually create another version of this character in the form of the Big Show, debuting in 1995 as the Giant. He was essentially Yokozuna 2.0, but unfortunately without the same charisma or in-ring skills. Still, he did become a multi-time world champion and one of the most recognizable faces in the company. Outside of the WWE, you had other promotions creating their own versions of the Monster Heel. In WCW, you had the likes of the 300-pound Big Bubba Rogers and the 350-pound Giant Gary Wolf. While in EC, they took a slightly different approach by creating a monster heel that didn't rely solely on their size. You see, when Paul White made his ECW debut in 1997, he was billed as the 395-pound Hawaiian Giant, which was definitely a play on the Yokozuna character. But unlike Yokozuna, he was actually very green in the ring. So instead of relying on his size, White decided to add a manager to compensate for his lack of experience. This manager, of course, was the legendary Paul Heyman, who helped put White over as a dominant force by managing him to victories and doing a lot of the talking for him. So rather than relying on size and strength, this version of the Monster Heel relied on intelligence and cunning instead. It was a brilliant move that allowed White to succeed in a role that he probably was unready for. And it gave Heyman something to do after losing the ECW World Championship earlier that year. As the years went on, though, White got better and better in the ring. And by the time he made it to WWE in 2000, he was a legitimate monster. He was a big, strong, athletic specimen that dominated every single match that he competed in. His presence alone striking fear into the hearts of his opponent. And while his in-ring career has long since ended, he still remains a prominent fixture within the company. But in terms of the greatest monster heel of all time, I honestly believe that it's a toss-up between two men, Braun Strowman and... Now both men followed a similar path. Teiwere UJ, powerful monsters that steamrolled anyone that got in their way. And they each had a weakness that allowed baby faces to defeat them. In Omega's case, it was his Samoan submission hold, the Samoan spike. And for Strowman, it was his inability to stay focused, usually due to outside interference. However, what set these two apart from everyone else is how dominant they were during their respective runs. For a brief moment in time, it felt like nothing and nobody was safe from these men. They were truly unstoppable forces of nature who seemed destined for greatness. Unfortunately, creative missteps would ultimately lead to both men being misused and never reaching their full potential. But nevertheless, their time at the top was incredibly fun to watch, and they remain two of my favorite wrestlers of all time. So, who do you think is the greatest monster heel of all time? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button as well. And with that said, thank you so much for watching.
Okay guys, thank you for watching my videos.